First, we'll have a presentation by Soumya Matthew, Assistant Manager, Media and Digital Programs, and then we transition into our last panel for the day. Soumya.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to bring in some academic rigor to my conversation today. So I start with a meme. So when Shahrukh said that बड़े बड़े देशों में छोटी छोटी बातें होती रहती हैं, one would assume that he was talking about how in the large digital world, small actions at individual levels could easily be considered the norm, right? This informed the top down approach that we employed when we took the digital media literacy module to our intervention areas in Uttar Pradesh to the young people of age 18 to 24. We thought that we will tell them that at an individual level, this is how you check fake news. This is how you verify whether an image is doctored or not. This is how you use Google reverse image search to understand where an image has been sourced from. And that is where we realize the gap lies. When we are looking at actions at an individual level and not contextualizing it in the norms that dictate our attitudes and behaviors. And here is where I argue that when Shahrukh said, "Badi badi deshon mein choti choti baatein hoti rehti hai," he probably was employing the oppositional gaze by bell hooks, and he was saying that actually the choti choti cheezein are quite big in their magnitude when you contextualize them in gender norms. So that informed our revised approach towards digital media literacy module that we are now piloting, that we are now taken to our intervention areas in Uttar Pradesh. It is norms based and a ground up approach to digital agency. This shift also came as a result of the needs from the community. When we took the module to ground, we realized that there was certain resistance and, in fact, some frustration to understanding a lot of technical know-how that we thought was the norm. Because with the young people that we were working with, we thought that they would understand what Google reverse image would mean, or how to use a simple Google Lens app on their phone. But we realized that young people are not monolithic in their entity, and that they come with diverse understanding of subject matter. So when we told them that this is how you use Boolean search to get authentic results, or that this is how you use Google Lens to understand what the source of an image is, especially because I, as a person, as a facilitator, was coming from outside their context, and I was not speaking to them from their local context and an understanding of their lived realities, it was met with frustration. Another important factor that also informed the revisions that we made in our module has been highlighted by some of the speakers and my colleagues previously here, that accessibility was a major issue, major concern that came up in our insights. Even when we saw that there were accessibility, we saw that a lot of young girls could only access smartphones by way of sharing the devices, either with their brothers or with their mothers. This also informed our understanding to shift the conversation away from an individual approach, where we are telling them that you as an individual this is how you should be identifying fake news or distinguishing between malinformation, disinformation, or misinformation. And we decided to root the conversation around gender norms. Now, when we center gender norms in our module, the conversation shifted from how we can look at gender norms inform the continuum of the real world and the virtual world, because the same norms that inform their lived realities, their positionalities in the real life, informed the algorithmic feeds that they were looking at in their phones, right? For example, my feed would look so different from the feed of a child or a young person in Uttar Pradesh. And this was because the norms that guided their lives informed what they were consuming or what they were watching or liking or subscribing on their phones. This is why when we revised the module, we decided that contextual learning as a method is important. So contextual and experiential learning became the the core method with which we were trying to disseminate the module. And one of the ways that we did it was by gamification. Now, gamification was interesting because, again, we were trying to gamify and make pointers or make the very obvious connection of gender norms in the real and the real world. And one of the ways that we did that was by the game of Taboo, which is quite popular, where uh, I whisper something into the ears of a participant, and by the time it reaches the 20th person, it has become something completely different. And this was, in fact, alluding to the fact that fake news or news travels in diverse ways, not just in your real life, not just at the chopar that you sit, but also in the in the virtual world that you are in. Another very interesting game that we played or we incorporated into our module was the use of AI. We do not want to shy away from the conversation around around the ethical use of AI. So we talked about how the norms or the prompts that you're feeding into AI then shows what then is basically giving you a virtual understanding of what you think adarsh ladki or a adarsh ladka or a bigra ladka or a bigra ladki is, and then the results that you would get from the prompts would then guide our discussions. We are now envisioning a world through our module. We are now envisioning a world where we have digital agency, and by we, I mean young people, especially young women and girls. And we want to approach the module now with a rights based, decentralized conversation at the center than telling young women that, hey, so when you are on the internet, you're not supposed to be doing this, or you have to put in two-factor authentication or have like a private account. Instead of saying that, our our approach now is to make sure that we do not have a protectionist approach that limits young women and girls access to a safe and free internet, but instead centralizes a rights-based conversation when we're talking about digital media literacy. With that, I'm opening up for the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soumya. Our final panel turns to the question of digital justice. In this panel, we turn to explore what digital justice means and how feminist thinking can help us reimagine an internet as a space which is inclusive and more equitable. For this panel, Manjusha Madhu, Senior Manager Research at Breakthrough, would be moderating. Manjusha. For the panelist, we have Shifali Malhotra, Senior Research Manager at Digital Future Labs. Shifali. Adrija Bose, Senior Editor at Boom. M. Chokalingam, Director Technology at Mascom AI. He is joining us online from Zoom. Yeah. And Chaya Rajput, Co-Manager Tech Saki at Point of View.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Mr. Chokalingam, can you hear us loud and clear? We can't hear you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you. Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for those, particularly to those who have stayed with us since morning. We know it's an extremely daunting task to listen to people through the day, but we truly appreciate your support. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us today. And I think this panel in many ways sort of sums up the conversations that we've been having since morning. And I'll pick up bits and pieces like terms that we've been hearing through the day, right? Digital exclusion, digital autonomy. There was a question to the second panel, which is essentially on structural shifts. And so in many ways, this panel is going to probe some of those aspects. For the lack of a better word, I could personally like using this, which is essentially the political economy of the technological landscape, right? So who are the big power players? Who is defining the kind of direction that the tech space and digital space is taking? There was a conversation around, and this is something that even internally at Breakthrough, we sort of constantly grapple with, which is sort of, you have these algorithmic sort of driven models, and whatever you were, and the question that sort of Priyanka posed during her opening remarks, which is essentially, if you have what is by in its very nature non-conformist, non-normative content, वो कंटेंट कैसे सक्सेसफुल होता है बाय द ट्रेडिशनल मेट्रिक्स दैट यू हैव on your social media platforms, right? So this panel has like a mix of experts, and we're hoping to sort of capitalize on each of their strengths and expertise. First of all, I'd like to come to you, Chaya. You work for TechSakhi, which is you've been doing phenomenal work for many years now. It support, I mean, it offers support to those who suffer, I mean, who have suffered, continue to suffer from online harm and tech facilitated gender based violence. तो थोड़ा आप अपने experience, particularly considering some of the conversations that we've been having since morning, जो vulnerable communities है, जो सवाल पूछा गया था second panel में, बहुत सारे, and we are just fresh out of the AI summit, so we have celebrated the immense potential of what AI is going to do, but what is the ground reality? What is it that you're hearing?
Hello. Hello. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And I am like, um, I've been observing the conversation happening since morning, and I'm glad the last presentation was about mainly gender norms and how the study went. So in reality as well, like we have been working in tech, gender and sex space, and we have been like running this helpline called TechSaki Digital Safety and Security Helpline for Women and Gender Minorities. Like it's been 4 years we have been running this helpline, and we have like received a lot of cases of tech facilitated gender based violence, and the cases are very diverse. Right. Most of the cases we have received are like 40% of fake profiles जो कि women and gender minorities face करते हैं, and काफ़ी सारे हैकिंग रिलेटेड केसेस, राइट? इसके अलावा काफ़ी हैरेसिंग कॉल्स एंड मैसेजेस भी आते हैं। इनमें जो हमें ये सबसे ज़्यादा इंसाइटफुल लगता है कि कब जभी भी हम किसी प्लेटफॉर्म को रिपोर्ट करते हैं, वो किस तरीके के रिस्पॉन्सेज देते हैं। उनके ऑटोमेटेड रिस्पॉन्सेज आते हैं जो कि काफ़ी इफेक्टिव नहीं होते हैं काफ़ी सारे लोगों के लिए। जब इमेज बेस्ड अब्यूज या कोई भी कम्युनिटी गाइडलाइन ये बड़े बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म्स बना रहे होते हैं, दे आर नॉट कंसिडरिंग द कॉन्टेक्चुअल बैकग्राउंड ऑफ दीज वीमेन एंड जेंडर माइनॉरिटीज पीपल है, राइट? एक इंडियन लड़की के लिए एक सिंपल इमेज का ऑनलाइन जाना इतना ही हार्म क्रिएट कर सकता है जितना किसी नॉन कंसेंचुअल इंटीमेट इमेज का बाहर जाना। तो वो कॉन्टेक्चुअल नॉलेज जो नहीं है बड़े बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म्स के पास, उनको उनकी एडवोकेसी करना लाइक काफ़ी क्रूशल हो जाता है वहाँ पे। इसके अलावा हमने कई जगह ये भी देखा है कि जो जेंडर नॉर्म्स की बात कर रहे हैं और जो एक्सेस की बात कर रहे हैं, ये हमने अपनी हेल्पलाइन पे भी जब केसेस आ रहे हैं तब एक्सपीरियंस किया है कि कैसे कई बार लड़कियों के बिहाफ पे उनके फादर ब्रदर कॉल कर रहे हैं और दे आर आस्किंग फॉर हेल्प, उनके ईमेल से हमें ईमेल आ रहे हैं। तो देयर इज ऑल्सो कि अगर किसी के साथ कुछ हो भी रहा है, दे आर ऑल्सो अनेबल टू एक्सेस द हेल्पलाइन एज वेल। लाइक उन तक वो नॉलेज भी नहीं है, वो इतने कॉन्फिडेंस से बात नहीं कर रहे। जब भी वो बात कर रहे हैं वो सॉरी कह के स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं कि मेरी गलती है, राइट? तो वो जेंडर नॉर्म जो हम फिजिकल स्पेसेस में देखते हैं, तो हम इसको भी फिजिकल स्पेस कहते हैं कि फिजिकल और टेक मिलके ऐसे फिजिकल स्पेस हो गया है। तो वहाँ पे भी कितने सारे जेंडर नॉर्म्स हैं कि आपको ऐसे ड्रेस नहीं पहनने हैं, आपको ऐसे पोस्ट नहीं करना या अपने ओपिनियन नहीं रखना है। तो सेम जेंडर नॉर्म्स हम ऑनलाइन देख रहे हैं और उन्हीं की वजह से हमने काफ़ी सारा वायलेंस भी देखा है, जो हमें टेक फैसिलिटेटेड जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस के केसेस आते हैं उसके थ्रू दिखाई देते हैं। इसमें भी देयर इज अनदर चैलेंज जो कि डिजिटल लिटरेसी का है कि दीज वीमेन डोंट नो हाउ टू रिपोर्ट ऑन दीज प्लेटफॉर्म, and also how these platforms are inaccessible in terms of reporting as well. Like a simple person won't even know किस पर्टिकुलर कैटेगरी में आपको अपना जो फेक अकाउंट बना है या कुछ भी अगर कंटेंट अपलोड हुआ है वो किस कैटेगरी में रिपोर्ट होगा। देयर आर सो मेनी कैटेगरीज एंड दीज आर वेरी टेक्निकल टर्म्स। देयर वुड बी सो मेनी पीपल हु डोंट इवन अंडरस्टैंड इम्पर्सोनेशन क्या होता है, राइट? सेक्सुअल एक्सप्लॉयटेशन क्या होता है। So, like a lot of tech platforms have been designed, especially these are not designed like thinking about Indian or Asian countries. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I think हम लोग भी वही there's a reason we call it tech facilitated gender based violence. जो चीज़ें हम बुलाते हैं nomenclature की जो बात होती है, why do there is a reason certain terms are used that way, right? हम online harm तो बोल ही सकते हैं, but हम बहुत increasingly ये देख रहे हैं कि जो लोगों का access नहीं है, उन लोगों का भी काफ़ी experience of brutal violence है. तो उसका and unlike जो फिजिकल वायलेंस जो फिजिकल वर्ल्ड में होता है, द नेचर ऑफ ऑनलाइन वायलेंस इज परपेचुअल, राइट? वो साइक्लिकल होता है क्योंकि आपकी एक चीज़ जो इंटरनेट में एक बार चली जाती है, फिर वो कभी भी ख़त्म नहीं होती है. देयर इज नो गारंटी दैट इट्स गोइंग टू एवर बी पेरेनियली डिलीटेड. बट एक इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ जो आपने जिक्र की, एंड आई थिंक अगेन दिस इज ब्रॉट अप अगेन इन पैनल 2, विच इज़ दिस क्वेश्चन ऑफ इंक्लूजन, डिज़ाइन बाय इंक्लूजन, राइट? आप डिज़ाइन कैसे सोचते हो? एक तो क्रिटिक ये है ही कि बहुत सारे मॉडल्स आपके जो आते हैं, दे आर लार्जली ग्लोबल नॉर्थ, राइट? एक पर्टिकुलर हिस्टोरिकल, ज्योग्राफिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट, सोशल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बना हुआ चीज़ है, जो हमारे आता है. देयर इज़ ऑल्सो अ लॉट ऑफ कन्वर्सेशंस अराउंड कहाँ-कहाँ डेटा सेंटर्स बन रहे, एक्सेट्रा. बट I feel it's also an important question for us to probe. And with that, perhaps, Mr. Chokalingam, I can come to you. You represent NASSCOM, which is, I mean, I forget the figure now, it's some 233 billion or something, which is this massive sector, and it's tech sector, and it's booming. And I do know that one cardinal principle that NASSCOM ke website, maybe it's mentioned, which is essentially that technology making making technology human centric while enabling and enriching lives is a core part of NASSCOM's vision. I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate, and I think the point a lot of us feminists and a lot of us sector people are accused of not talking to people and understanding what is happening in the sector itself. So if you can perhaps shed light on that, please. Thank you.
So thanks, Manjusha, for bringing me in this discussion. And then, yeah. So if you see, I mean, inclusion by design. So any technology, right? It should be adapt to people. I mean, that's how every technology is designed, right? And then country like us, typically, which we have multiple languages, varying literacy level, differential abilities, and then even uneven access to devices, right? I mean, we have so much of what do you say, disproportionate access to technology, right? So whenever we make any platform, right, we consider all this, right, all these scenarios, and then we make a design considering all this. Okay, if people don't know how to write, I mean, read and write, then they can use your voice, right? I mean, there are platforms. If you see last few years, I can say last 4 5 years, every even the government, every government is pushing for yeah, on bringing digital platforms, which is very inclusive, right? One I can bring some of those examples also, right? The best example is the UPI, right? I mean, when the UPI was designed, it was designed for smartphones, right? And it came as an application for Android, then it moved to Apple. I mean, then people thought, I mean, when it should be democratized, even people had feature phones in their hands, right? Now, then slowly the design was included where a feature, the people who have feature phones can even transact the value, I mean, wherever they are. So that's a kind of inclusion they brought when UPI was scaled, right? This is one example. So we came across one of the non-profit organization called Jugalbandi. So they are predominantly in the northeastern states, right, where women literacy is still low. And then there are a lot of government schemes which are more on women centric, which they are not even aware. So one of the non-profit organizations supported by Microsoft, so they made a voice-based scheme disbursement, I mean, scheme information dissemination system, right? I mean, the women can talk about themselves and find out what are the schemes available for them in the government, and then how they should go and apply for those schemes, whether they are eligible. So all these things are done just exactly through their voice plus on their native language. So that's one of the system we are seeing in some of the pockets. People are building local applications which cater to their either to their community or to their states. So that we are seeing across. Purely it is a voice-based system, right? And then these are I mean, government take this as a part of the digital public infrastructure what government is building right now, right? I mean, this is one. These are some of the examples. This is a prominent example, and there are many in these cases, right? And then third thing is like if we government is rating some of those states under something called NESDA, NESDA. So NESDA provides guidelines on how you make e-governance application, be it a government to government service or even government to citizen services, G2C services, right? So they are what they give marks, right? If you have two important criteria, one is the accessibility criteria, right? When visually impaired, so how the color combination should be on and the font sizes of your websites or the web portal. This is one. So that has a weightage, right? And then second, if you put a chatbot on your portal, so that has an weightage. So every 2 years, NESDA runs a assessment of the states and then provide ranks, and then who moves the ladder, who is the first state who are digitally enabled especially on government to citizen services. So these are part of the government initiative. So law inclusion happens at every layer. I mean, still gap is there, I agree, but what happens is like people started looking into these areas more seriously, and then whenever they build a solution, and these are the top priority, and then the which are included in the design stage.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chokling. And just one quick follow-up question to that. You mentioned, of course, the government structures in place, but I was also curious to know how the sort of corporate sector, like the tech big companies, and you mentioned UPI as an example, and I don't think UPI penetration is, I mean, possibly India is perhaps one of the leading countries in terms of how deeply, and I think in many ways the pandemic was instrumental to that. But if you could also give us some example, or perhaps one, because due to paucity of time, anything around how corporates also look at the question of inclusion, and if you've seen some very powerful examples in that case as well.
See, typically most of the business making, any corporate portals, in fact, right? I mean, has to adhere to this UN standards, right? When they are playing globally, right? When I make a system like you take for Amazon or even Flipkart, whatever they which are typically corporate sector, right? I mean, whenever they come up with their platform, they should include these into their design, and then they launch the portal, right? Today you can talk to what do you say, your Amazon app, and then you can get your goods delivered, right? I mean, these are part of their system. I mean, not only government, but even the larger corporates adhere to this. I mean, most of your phone comes with AI enabled devices, right, which listens to your voice and calls action, right? I mean, these are by design right now, and AI is reducing this gap, I can see.
Okay, thank you so much. Just picking up on one point that Mr. Chokalingam said, which is essentially government structures, right? And I thought that would be a really great segue to you, Shefali, because you've worked extensively on the policy aspect of how technology has been shaping in India and also the global majority world. And what is your sense of the historical evolution of the conversation? How has the discourse, what was it originally and where has it come today with our great AI promise?
Can you? Firstly, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here with my co-panelists, and thank you to Breakthrough for inviting me. When we talk historically, and if we go back, really way back to the 1991 liberalization, and when we first got our national telecom policy, I think at that time, India India's approach was that gender equality will be a downstream benefit of connectivity, but it did not really form part of policy design. So the assumption was that connectivity, internet is neutral, and the benefits will flow equally to all genders. um, this assumption was misplaced, right? And so we saw that this is not true. We saw women face barriers to digital access. Women also are at the receiving end of online violence, whether it's sexual harassment, blackmail, or increasing surveillance. And even when it comes to accessing welfare benefits, women were disproportionately affected when things started going more digital, right? So this assumption was misplaced. Now, AI comes at the back of this unequal foundation. And so this unfinished business of digital policy is where we are starting with AI development, AI and deployment, right? And why does this matter? This matters because AI apps, models are essentially built on past data, on existing data. In the Indian context, this data is marked by underrepresentation of women in online spaces, in public records, in employment. And so now we see proliferation of a lot of apps and systems which are giving out biased outputs or are perpetuating existing stereotypes. And this is leading to a lot of harms. And we are seeing these harms emerge. I think Chaya really nicely spoke about all the different kinds of harms. So I won't go into that right now. Um, but just to make a point that troll armies or coordinated mass smear campaigns or rape threats that we've seen in online spaces, this is not something that started with AI. It has existed since we got the internet. What AI has done is supercharge them. Right now, today, deepfake apps or nudification apps are available at such low cost. So the cost of undertaking these kind of activities is nearly zero, right? And so it has proliferated this kind of violence to the next level, but AI is not the starting point of it. In terms of what has been the policy reaction, so initially I spoke about how digital policy traditionally has been blind to gender equality, to gender issues. I think with this AI coming in, I think we do see a shift happening where gender equality was invisible at one point. Today it is, I would say, it is awkwardly visible, right? So yeah, so we are seeing it. We are seeing sporadic policy responses, but are they sufficient? Are they wholesome? Are they systemic? I don't think so. Um, but I would, I'll quickly just take you through what are the different kind of measures that we have seen, right? So I think the first point, I think a good starting point would be the 2021 intermediary guidelines. Although those did not directly deal with tech facilitated gender based violence, but it was the first time that, legally we got a framework to hold platforms accountable. I think after that, around 2023, we also started seeing METI. METI is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology issuing advisories to platforms to curb this kind of synthetically generated, harmful, illegal content. But these were advisories, they were not binding. In the same year, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act was also passed. And I think this was an important moment because it's the first time we saw data being seen as a space of rights, right? And I think in the context of gender-based violence, this is important because when you're taking someone's location to stalk them, or you're taking their photos and morphing them into something, these are essentially data harms, right? Um, Now, as a concept, yes, it was an important moment. Does the data protection law provide adequate protections? We can discuss that. But I think it falls short. It will fall short on many counts. So, just to give you an example, a lot of this imagery is just taken from social media, right? Publicly available data is not covered under Digital Personal Data Protection Act. So, all the protections of consent and all would not technically apply there, right? Now, after the digital personal data protection last year, MeitY issued an SOP to deal with non-consensual intimate imagery. This was not an active policy intervention. This was in response to a Madras High Court judgment, and so they put out a system for intergovernmental coordination and also mechanisms of how this kind of imagery is not re-uploaded. And finally, just last year, not last year, sorry, last month, we saw an amendment, and a very important amendment to the intermediary guidelines, where synthetically generated content was defined for the first time. Intermediaries are now obligated to take down illegal synthetic media content as well as label any kind of synthetic media content. So, I mean, this is how policy has developed. So I'll stop here and wait for more questions from you.
So much, Shefali. And there's actually quite a lot of rich landscape for us to go into, but unfortunately, due to lack of time, I'll have to like sort of pick one or two. I might come back to the DPTP aspect as well, because again, I think touches upon a very cardinal principle of digital rights. तो है, मगर जब RWA वाले बोलते हैं कि MyGate install करना ही है और जो आ रहा है उनका फोटो सब कुछ आपको लेना है, then I honestly don't know what. And obviously, it's extremely classist sort of a thing, right? Because किसी लोगों का digital rights का आपको पता है, बट किसी लोगों का फोटो आप उनका फिंगरप्रिंट सब कुछ लेने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं होता है. But Adrisha, if I can just, I mean, sort of Shefali's brought in the gender aspect in a more sort of overt fashion. You're one of the few tech journalists who sort of also cover gender quite substantially. So I was curious to know, since the time you've been sort of following this space, the idea of digital gender divide, how has it shifted? Has it mutated? What are the new ways that it's popping up?
Uh, so I think both of them have said quite a bit around what I wanted to talk about. But quickly from my experience, and I heard a lot here also, we talked about accessibility, which I think was one of the biggest concerns, right? When I also started off as a journalist and covering gender. Um, in fact, even in 2020, when pandemic hit, I saw like, young girls had to drop out of schools because they didn't have phones. Like we discussed, they had to share phones with their brothers, etc. So now that accessibility was always a problem. And like Shefali also pointed out, that over the last few years, it has amplified. The more technological interventions have happened, the gender divide has amplified. So I want to give like 2-3 examples to kind of come to a question of, when we don't think it's almost like an afterthought when we think about building in design for exclusion, for bringing in like making sure that women and children also have easy access to it. It's almost an afterthought after the harms and violence has already happened. Then probably we think about how to fix it. So, for example, one of the things you were talking about, the MyGate pass. Currently in India, Anganwadi workers are forced to use facial recognition technology on women to give them ration. This is an AI system. The FRT is used to Google ML Kit. So Google kind of is supposed to determine whether your Aadhaar card face matches with your current face now. And it is not possible because you're aging, and these are pregnant women and children that they're using this on. And it is compulsory across the country. It started last year. And what is happening is, as we've seen with Aadhaar and all of these things, that people are not getting welfare benefits. Like, well, I don't want to call it benefits, that's wrong, but just basic rights of not being able to get food. And why is it that we started off with Anganwadi workers who are the poorest women in the country, serving the poorest women in the country? So they are being forced to implement AI and AI determines whether a woman can get their food or not. So, like who shapes and benefits from these systems is something that I want to understand, and obviously we know the problems with it. So, Anganwadi worker is one thing. She spoke about these Nudify tools also, which are initially, about 3 years ago, when I started reporting on it, it was an American Silicon Valley company called Cloth Off, which was the big company that was doing it, And Indian people were customizing it and turning into Bollywood actresses, nude videos, AI deepfakes, etc., and building it or putting it on their website. Now there are Telegram bots, Indianized Telegram bots. In the last 3 years, they have developed. So you can basically just put anybody's picture and they will turn it into a full fledged nude image or a video in a few seconds. So again, who is it benefiting? Why does this tool even exist? And the Nudify tools economy, just so you all know, globally it is 36.4 million per year dollars. That is the kind of massive economy that it is. Um, I want to pick over a third example quickly, which is about AI cameras in forest. Again, it was built in to apparently protect women, largely women, because women are the ones who are going to the forest to collect wood or spend time, etc. There's a Cambridge study that came out about 2 years ago, which showed that these cameras, first of all, the women had no idea that these cameras are there. So they go there, they probably shower there, sit there, I don't know, change clothes, whatever they do. The cameras took their pictures, and some of those pictures went viral on social media. So who were we protecting? What was the reason, purpose of those cameras? That it was to protect you from tigers. Tigers are still coming. Women are now have an extra added fear. So yeah, like I think like every time I talk about it, I get a little angry. Although I report on it constantly, but it's about, like these technologies are supposed to be helping people, and AI is supposed to be reducing those harms, but somehow it keeps amplifying it.
To know that, for example, your work on APAR is also quite it's the same problem, right? आपको student ID चाहिए, it has to be linked to Aadhaar, but आपका सब कुछ digital होना चाहिए.
Yeah, can I
Yeah,
quickly just add something to this?
Yeah,
One second, one point. Like even with APAR, which is a student ID right now, see, with Aadhaar, what had happened was when women who faced the biggest hurdles with Aadhaar, women. Why? Because most of them had to change their names after getting married. So when their name changes, it becomes a hurdle and they cannot get their basic whatever welfare benefits that they were supposed to get. It goes into some other account that they had created earlier. So to fix that name also is such a hurdle. They are going for years and years, they're trying to fix that. So APAR is also.
Thanks so much. Unfortunately, I've been getting chits saying that we are running out of time, but we will do one quick round of because I do feel there are other couple of important points that we need to cover. एक मैं चाहे फिर से जब व्हेन आई एक चीज हम जो बोलते हैं ना वी कॉन्स्टेंटली से कि हाँ हार्म हो रही है डिजिटल बट है तो डिजिटल अब it has become and I know that there are a lot of like fantastic feminist techies out there who say the internet as we see it abhi is not the inevitable way we can imagine it, right? But considering that a lot of these welfare schemes everything sab kuch hai, there is a certain engagement with the digital world jo सबको करना हो रहा है, they're pushed into it, right? आपको नौकरी चाहिए, आपको स्कूल जाना है, कॉलेज जाना है, सब कुछ करना है. तो आपके काम में एंड लार्जली पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू के काम से आपको क्या लगता है कि अगर पर्टिकुलरली वल्नरेबल कम्युनिटीज जो माना जाता है उनका एक कंस्ट्रक्टिव रिलेशनशिप टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ अगर बिल्ड करना हो, डिजिटल जो सौम्या के प्रेजेंटेशन था एक तो है डिजिटल लिटरेसी है ना वो सारा जो, पर उसके अलावा डू यू फीड आपका कोई इंसाइट्स है, कोई लर्निंग्स है जो आपको लगता है कि इम्पोर्टेंट होगा?
आई थिंक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू का जो लार्जर वर्क है उसमें भी एंड इसके बियॉन्ड भी लाइक काफ़ी सारे चीज़ें हैं जो लाइक आइडली सबको सारे स्टेक होल्डर्स को मिलके करना चाहिए. सो दर इज दिस डिजिटल लिटरेसी का प्रोग्राम में भी जो लार्ज स्केल पे होना चाहिए एंड मीट द पीपल वेयर दे आर. लाइक अगर आप लाइक एज लोगों के साथ कर रहे हो देन उनके हिसाब से उस मॉड्यूल को बनाना चाहिए. अगर आप यंग लोगों के साथ बात कर रहे हो तो उनके हिसाब से बनाना चाहिए. उनके हिसाब से बात करके आप उस चीज़ को लाइक काफ़ी इफ़ेक्टिव बना सकते हो, चाहे वो डिजिटल लिटरेसी की बात हो या किसी और प्रोग्राम की आप बात कर रहे हों. इसके अलावा सिर्फ लाइक डिजिटल लिटरेसी में सिर्फ स्किल की बात नहीं रह गई है कि उनको पता होना चाहिए मोबाइल कैसे यूज़ करना है, एक ऐप कैसे यूज़ करना है, बट ऑल्सो अंडरस्टैंडिंग द प्रोड थिंग्स की डेटा क्या होता है, राइट? एल्गोरिदम बाइजेस क्या होते हैं. आप एक
क्लिक से क्या-क्या दे रहे हो, कितना एक्सेस आप किसी पर्टिकुलर प्लेटफ़ॉर्म को दे रहे हो, वो कैसे आपको मैनिपुलेट कर सकता है। चाहे वो टारगेटेड एड्स के थ्रू हो, चाहे वो मोनेटाइज़ेशन के थ्रू हो। तो इट्स नॉट जस्ट स्किल्स के हिसाब से बट ओवरऑल ब्रॉडली भी काफ़ी चीज़ों को समझने की अभी ज़रूरत है। एंड आई फ़ील सबको ज़रूरत है। मुझे तो लगता है कई बार कि स्कूल्स में लाइक डिजिटल लिटरेसी प्रोग्राम होने चाहिए बिकॉज़ छोटे-छोटे बच्चे यूज़ कर रहे हैं लाइक एआई। सो आई फ़ील वहाँ से कुछ चीज़ें हम स्टार्ट कर सकते हैं। इसके अलावा आई फ़ील ब्रॉडली हमें प्लेटफ़ॉर्म्स को भी अकाउंटेबल ठहराना चाहिए कि वो कैसे प्लेटफ़ॉर्म को डिज़ाइन कर रहे हैं, किस तरीके की पॉलिसीज़ रख रहे हैं और वो हमारे डेटा कैसे यूज़ कर रहे हैं, राइट? सो पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू इज़ ऑल्सो वर्किंग जहाँ पे हम एक प्लेटफ़ॉर्म अकाउंटेबिलिटी कैंपेन चला रहे हैं, जिसमें हम बात करते हैं कि प्लेटफ़ॉर्म को अकाउंटेबल होना चाहिए फॉर डिफरेंट थिंग्स जो भी उनके प्लेटफ़ॉर्म पे हो रहा है। तो एक ये है, इसके अलावा काफ़ी हम सोशल मीडिया स्ट्रैटेजीज़ की भी बात करते हैं, जिसमें पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू इज़ नॉट जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट कि डिजिटल स्पेसेस में क्या-क्या हो रहा है, बट ऑल्सो जस्ट नॉट अबाउट द फियर बट आप कैसे उस स्पेस को एन्जॉय भी कर सकते हैं। टॉकिंग अबाउट प्लेज़र, कंट्रोल, कास्ट, केयर, कम्युनिटी बिल्डिंग एंड एवरीथिंग। तो मतलब कुछ-कुछ ये स्ट्रैटेजीज़ हैं, जिनको हम इंक्लूड करके बात कर सकते हैं। एंड इसके अलावा मे बी गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से एंड काफ़ी सारे सिविल सोसाइटी कैन ऑल्सो टेक स्टेप फॉरवर्ड जहाँ पे दे आर बिल्डिंग अ कम्युनिटी जहाँ पे वो काफ़ी एडवोकेसी कर रहे हैं अबाउट दीज काइंड ऑफ इश्यूज एंड ऑल्सो लॉ लाइक लॉ में काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें पॉलिसी चेंज होना है उसके बाद उसका इम्प्लीमेंशन लाइक कई बार आपके पास पॉलिसीज होते हैं आपके पास लॉ होते हैं बट वहां तक एक्सेसिबिलिटी नहीं होता है राइट सो उसका भी एक गैप को फिल करना तो आई फील दीज आर वेरी क्रूशियल थिंग्स जो हमें लगता है
Okay, thanks so much, Shaya. तो इसी में एक point, Mr. Choklam, if I can come to you. You're also the Chief Technology Officer at NASSCOM AI. So we've also listened, and I'm sure this is also not news for you. While we also understand there is immense potential with the way AI, and you've mentioned a couple of examples where it's actually helped communities, right? But I was curious to know, as somebody who's part of the sector and occupies quite a lot of vital government spaces. What is your sense of AI adoption? What are the kind of, do you anticipate any challenges in terms of how AI is perhaps indiscriminately used? And what to your mind are the merits and what could potentially be some of the pitfalls?
Okay. So if you consider only the AI, right? I mean, typically we build only use cases, right? I mean, now we are building models, but predominantly we are the capital of use cases, right? We take some model and innovatively think what it can be put into, and then we make applications or mobile apps which go to the users, end users, right? So this is the trend in every technology, right? Whatever makes the Western countries make, we take that and the system build some use case around it and then disseminate. So to address some of the previous points, right? I mean, digital literacy, right? Typically, all this in the pace of innovation to use case to adoption, and then the literacy is the last part, right? I mean, nobody knows when an application is built, what it is used for, right? I mean, typically you have to refer a book called Coders, Coders, Coders. Coders is a book written by a Facebook engineer, right? When they built Facebook, right, in 2004-5 period, they thought people will express freely. It's a free speech platform, right? I mean, you can express your views, but what happened after 10 years, right? If you see after 10 years, any social media, not even Facebook, any social media platform, it started polarizing. It's very abusive. I mean, it's 95%. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, we understood, okay, these are used for even political benefits, right? I mean, the people who really built those systems never thought of these things when they designed or when they developed this system. And this is with every technology, because engineers who are building the systems think very linearly, saying, okay, this will make life better. So that's one ideology people take and build solution, right? And then when it comes, so when digital literacy happens, when things happen, and then how to educate the people, not how not to use this. Again, what the curriculum they are designing for this, right? I mean, that is large disconnect, right? When you are going for any digital literacy program, there is a large disconnect, right? I mean, people what they are teaching, we even never know. I mean, because somebody is making the application and somebody is doing the literacy curriculum program, right? I mean, that's one thing which we see as a pitfall, right? We are not connected, so because we don't know the complete dimensionality of those applications, right? I mean, because people's imagination is very different, right? I mean, one such example, right? I mean, when we are using ChatGPT for getting information, right? And people are building personas for ChatGPT, right? Somebody even went ahead and start negotiating the salary. I mean, when we preparing interview through ChatGPT, right? What should be my salary, next salary? So they ask ChatGPT to, and then get a negotiated value and go to the interview. Nobody thought this use case, right? So people usage of application varies on people's imagination. So that's so, and then creating literacy for all those things is very going to be very challenging, because the innovation acceleration is very high, right? I mean, if you look at every day, we get new application, new AI models in place. Roughly, I can say 2.5 million models are already out, and then every day something is coming up. This is one, right? And then the second is like the what we need to look at. I mean, now we see this is we should look at digital literacy 3.0, right? What is which focus on what is say AI literacy, cyber security, data privacy, digital well-being. That's one thing which people are ignoring, right? I mean, AI psychosis is a new thing which is coming up in the Western countries. I mean, it will not be late in India soon. You can see this here, right? People overuse usage of these applications relate to psychosis. So these are the pitfalls, right? I mean, which technology is accelerating those things, but uh, how to fix this gap? I mean, even I don't have the answer.
Thanks so much, Mr. Zoe. But it's also important. Thank you. And I think it's an important point to constantly remind ourselves that technology innovation, whichever industrial revolution, every time some massive technological revolution has happened, it has created havoc. And I think humanities has figured some way around, of course, with immense losses and the pace with which, of course, technology is rapidly mutating. Shafali and Adrija, quickly to both of you. Shafali, you specifically, I was curious to know if, of course, as sharp an answer as possible. One, how can civil society organizations play a more proactive role in shaping some of these conversations? And two, you're somebody who follows both the national and global sort of discourses. So I was curious to know what is the kind of interplay between, because this is something important that Chaya had brought up also, because one of the biggest problem is because a lot of these organizations are global entities, right? So accountability, all of that is extremely complex. So there's sort of delicate balance between national and international frameworks. So if you could just shed a light on that, yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to be as sharp as possible. For civil society, I think there are, I would say that three things I think civil society in this space can really focus on. One is the conversation around inclusivity and AI safety is running parallelly. I think inclusivity is an essential condition of safety, because when we talk about AI safety, it's not about technical fixes, technical problems. It's essentially a question of power. Who is being able to perpetuate this violence? Who is benefiting? Who is it costing? Right? And so I think in terms of when we are doing advocacy, I think we need to really put these two together and make them integral to each other rather than two separate parallel conversations. Secondly, I think one thing that we can really benefit from, and a lot of organizations that are working directly with survivors to build a very systematic database of the kinds of harms that are perpetuating. Right now, I think we know of a lot of incidents, but we don't have a database with which we can identify trends, we can identify patterns. We could probably even predict what will happen in the future so that we can preempt and address those issues. We cannot tell which policy is working, which is not working, which is failing, why is it failing, right? So I think one place where a lot of organizations which are working directly with survivors that they can work is to build this kind of a database which can inform legislative, judicial efforts, but also our own advocacy efforts. And the third place I think where we can start working is on testing all these kinds of apps that are coming, right? Which in the first place are being used to perpetuate this kind of harms. And so thinking about evaluation frameworks, of assessing these apps, right? Probably even working with industry, with companies to get them to do these evaluations. But if they are not, then trying to see if we can have more community evaluations. Um, yeah, so I think these are the three things at Digital Futures Lab. We at the summit we just launched a Global South network, for where we are planning to kind of work on these evaluation frameworks, and this is definitely an area where we are, we will be interested in seeing what kind of evaluation frameworks we can have to assess these apps, before they even come into the market. And so I think these are the three things I think, immediately that we can do. In terms of global and national level, I agree with Chaya. A lot of this crime is transnational. So the platform where it's happening is in one place, the victim is in one place, the evidence is in another place, and so it is all over the place. And by the time you activate your legal processes to collect that evidence, to do something about it, I think the crime has already kind of spread. So I think this is a major vacuum. I don't have a ready answer, but I would just say that we need to push this is a work of diplomacy, and I think maybe we need to update our agreements of evidence sharing in these kind of crimes, so that understanding the nature of how fast all this spreads, so that redress can come faster.
Thank you so much, Shafali. So, and finally to you, Adrija, and to possibly end on a hopeful and joyous note, not to be accused of dampeners all the time. One point is that, and I think this is a crux that we are also sort of trying to get to, is this: there is a lot of gatekeeping that comes with a lot of technology, any of these great, like important knowledge bodies, right? So, can you think of like global national examples which have offered alternatives, for the lack of a better word? And the session was also to imagine a feminist internet. So I was wondering if you might have any thoughts on that. Internet was supposed to be the great democratizing force, unfortunately, starting out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this question on my Instagram asking what do you think of what is a feminist AI? I got a lot of random answers, including lots of cats, etc. But I think feminist AI for me, like, would be who collects the data, whose consent was obtained, and who benefits from the model. If you ask these three questions, I think you can make a more inclusive sort of any sort of technological framework. Quickly on examples, I spent some time looking at examples. I know, like, when I was at the AI summit discussing, and obviously Brazil kind of comes about how excellently they have been handling sovereign ethical AI framework, building it while thinking about gender at the same time, not as an afterthought. It's a part of their entire plan. They have a 4-year plan where they're really bringing in the community to build these things. And Brazil is pretty much the example that, we all look at when we are researching on AI. But there's one more that I found out, and probably some of you know about it. This thing called Zenzileni Networks, which is in South Africa, which is basically a community-owned internet provider in rural South Africa, and local residents run and maintain the telecom infrastructure. And why it matters is because infrastructure ownership changes power, right? So it's not just about training women how to use basic phone or UPI. I think it's also to make them the people who can build AI tools, who can decide what AI tools do we want, what kind of technology do we want. Like, why won't, for example, Anganwadi workers ask what kind of AI tool would ease your work instead of making it more difficult? So, and they can give you answers for that, and then there'll be developers who can build it. So, I think that one thing. I mean, of course, TechSaki does excellent work. There are other helpline numbers that does very good work, including Prati Foundation. There's one example I want to talk about, which is this it's one of the most interesting feminist AI projects in India, which is called the Uli data set run by Tatil. And so basically what happened was they got together a bunch of queer and women to discuss words that platforms do not recognize as violence. And we have also seen that when we point out it's violent content, platform will come to us and tell us no, it doesn't violate our guideline because it's in some other language. So they actually came together and built an entire data set where we kind of put together stuff that is sarcasm, which is coded misogyny, contextual harassment. I think it's an excellent data set, and we should all probably think of building such data sets given the work that we do as well. Yeah, that's
We were also supposed to have another speaker who's also done something very similar, having developed an AI tool essentially that picks up, because that is the trick. Now, yeah, so the language sort of thing, and usme aap kuch dal do so that the system can't pick up.
Yeah, so she's
Yeah.
basically built Oindria. So she's basically built this Chrome extension, and you can put it anywhere, right? And it will kind of figure out contextual hate speeches. That's the simple LLM that she's built. It's super interesting, and actually any website can add it. If Facebook wants today, they can.
Yeah.
Put it.
I think their work, and I think there's a community there also that's now increasingly trying to think of all these. Unfortunately, we are out of time. If there are any pressing questions, I suppose otherwise we can just take it up during tea. Yeah. So I think, yeah. So thank you so much for joining us on this session. I know, Kid, because when when we had imagined this conversation, हम लोग जानते हैं कि there's a certain way that digital interventions are imagined, and बहुत सारी जिक्र हुई है first session, second session में. But we thought it was important to also ask the bigger questions, because and किसी ने तो ecosystem की बात की थी. So if the larger ecosystem is as problematic, as toxic as ever, then aapki interventions or aapki solutions are only going to go this far. And we're also in a very strange time in the world today. There are conversations of how AI is also being drawn into the war that is happening in different parts of the world currently. So it's an as important time as ever to have these conversations. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. Thank you.